Our first reading this morning is Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 22 through 29. Set apart a tithe of all the yield of your seed that is brought in yearly from the field. In the presence of the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose as a dwelling for his name, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, as well as the firstlings of your herd and flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But if, when the Lord your God has blessed you, the distance is so great that you are unable to transport it, because the place where the Lord your God will choose to set his name is too far away from you, then you may turn it into money. With the money secure in hand, go to the place that the Lord your God will choose. Spend the money for whatever you wish: oxen, sheep, wine, strong drink, or whatever you desire. As you shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your household rejoicing together. As for the Levites resident in your towns, do not neglect them, because they have no allotment or inheritance with you. Every third year you shall bring out the full tithe of your produce for that year and store it within your towns. The Levites, because they have no allotment or inheritance with you, as well as the resident aliens, the orphans, and the widows of your towns, may come and eat their fill, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work that you will undertake.
Our second reading for today comes from the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 15, verses 20 through 28. I invite you all to listen now to the Word of God to you. But, in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead has also come through a human being. For as all die in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ. But each in his own order: Christ the first fruits, then at his coming those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end, when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father, after he has destroyed every ruler and authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. For God has put all things in subjection under his feet. But when it says all things are put in subjection, it is plain that this does not include the one who put all things in subjection under him. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to the one who put all things in subjection under him, so that God may be all in all. Amen. This is the word of the Lord. So I've probably mentioned before that I'm a terrible gardener, but I love it. I love when the time has finally come for me to eat something that I grew in my garden. I want nothing to do with flowers. If I can't eat it, I'm not interested in growing it. Last year I started seeds in February on a moist paper towel in a little plastic bag, and I forgot about them for a couple weeks and they got moldy. And so I had to throw those away. But the second try, I got little tiny sproutlings, and I transferred those little tiny sproutlings into little eggshell containers, and when they got bigger, I transferred them into little bit bigger containers, and finally, with a little bit of help from Ray, I got them into the ground, and then the seasons here are a little bit different from where they were in Texas. I don't know what May counts as. Is that spring? Spring. Starting in the spring and all through the summer, I watered and I waited and I gave reports to the rest of my family, who cared very little, if at all. I would tell Jane, who kind of cared because she's been with me this whole time, in the process. I told Kate, who knew nothing, and I told Hannah, who has watched this process for almost a decade now, and is no longer nearly as impressed as she once was. I would say, I think I'm seeing flowers. I'm seeing flowers, but nothing is coming out of the flowers. And I went in this year and I got a Q-tip and I wiped the Q-tip around the flowers to help them pollinate. I'm working hard for this. And eventually I came in and I said, I think I saw a little green tomato. And every time I would go out to water, I would give everybody an account of the size of this one little green tomato, and that it was turning red, and maybe it would be this week, or maybe it would be next week, and finally I got to pull it off of the vine with my bare hands. I didn't use gloves because I'm brave. And I got some balsamic vinegar, and I bought some basil because I killed like 6 basil plants during this period. and some olive oil and some mozzarella, and for dinner that night we had a caprese salad. And it was delicious. The first fruits are a special thing. The first fruits that you remember all of this labor, and sure, later in the year we were overrun with tomatoes and I didn't know what to do with them, but that first tomato was so special. This is something an 8-year-old could do, I know, but when I pull something off of the vine or something that I grew, that I was a part of, I am the proudest peacock you'll ever see. I strut my everything. Look at what I did. Can you feel that? Do you know that feeling? I know not everybody is a gardener, but can you remember some time when you got to taste the fruits of your labors? Your first paycheck? Ever been in a restaurant or a business where the first dollar that they made is framed up there on the wall? There's something special. There's something really special about first fruits, even when we're not talking about the fruit of the land. They're an assurance that our work can bear fruit. They're a promise that maybe there is more fruit to come. In Old Testament times, I don't know if you guys know this, but money was not all that common. You only have money if you've got so much stuff that you can't carry it around to trade it. You only have money if you're wealthy enough to be traveling from one place to another or trading or something like that. The real wealth in the ancient world was food. I've been reading this book on late antiquity, and I know that is a far cry from Deuteronomy, which is the time in the wilderness. But I've been reading in late antiquity, and it talks about in Rome, 60% of the wealth of the Roman Empire was pulled up out of the ground, was harvested. That is, of all the things that had any value in the world that could be bought and sold, most of the wealth, and of course, that evaporates, right? So at harvest time, there's all of this wealth in the world, and then slowly over the course of the year, you eat it, and it's gone, and the world is a much poorer place. They harvested things, the Roman Empire was big, and some harvests were in the spring and some in the fall, so there's sort of harvest going year round, but for every area, there was a point at which, there wasn't nearly as much. And harvests could vary at the time of the Roman Empire, which is a much more technologically advanced world than in Deuteronomy. The harvest could vary as much as 50% year to year. That is, one time you might have enough for the year. One year you might have half that. One year you might have double that. That's a tenuous thing. That's a scary thing. That's a vulnerable thing. What that means is that at the end of the harvest, whenever that harvest was, your whole salary is sitting there on the threshing room floor. You can look at it. You can pick it up. You can taste it. And then the tax man comes. The tax collector comes. And then your rent is due. And the economy at this time was a largely extractive economy. So by the time the tax collection was done and by the time the rent was collected, you're looking at probably less than a third of what you had harvested. And you're looking at it trying to figure out, how do we make this stretch until the next harvest? Anybody that's ever eaten rice and beans or ramen at the end of the month knows that feeling, right? How do we make it to the next paycheck? How do we get to the next? Which makes this notion that Darlene read for us in Deuteronomy, that people would bring their first fruits such an incredible and sort of bewildering thing, because the first fruits are not an assurance that you're going to be okay for the year. You know, the first fruits, they might tell you that you had a harvest at all, right? A hailstorm could absolutely demolish crops, and you might not get much fruit at all out of that. But they were no guarantee that you were going to make it through the year. That first dollar that you framed on the wall is no guarantee that this business is going to work out for you. That first paycheck is no guarantee that you can quit your day job if you've gone out on your own. And in the face of that, what we hear in the book of Deuteronomy is God saying, bring it to me first. Take the first fruits to me. This stuff that, you know, if you were maybe a little bit wiser, a little bit more of the world, you would be socking away because you don't know what the rest might look like. You don't know what's coming for you. But bring that to me. Bring that to the place where God is. Remember, in Deuteronomy, they're still traveling. There's a tabernacle that they're following around, and they're about to move into the promised land. So there might be a degree of stability, but it's still hundreds of years before there will be a temple. But bring that to God in the tabernacle, in the synagogue, in the altar, the high places, wherever it is that you find God, and eat it in my presence. That's the command in Deuteronomy. It's not give it to the temple, because the temple doesn't exist yet. It's eat it in my presence. Remember who brought this to you. Right? The first fruits are a moment of thanksgiving. They're a moment in which we give thanks for the God who brings forth the fruits from the ground for us. But also, they're an expression of trust. It is not, bring me the leftovers. Bring me the very last thing that you put in your storehouse, or wait until everything is collected and you're sure that you can afford to bring something to me and then eat it. No, it is bring me the first. Put your trust in me, because I have provided it for you, because I will provide for you. Bringing your first fruits to God is this act of thanksgiving and trust that God will bring more. To bring your first fruits to God is to step off briefly the treadmill of acquisition and anxiety and worry, and put yourself into a world of trust in God's providence. The command here is not so much a command to give to the church, but it's twofold. The first is to set aside your resources for God. Set aside some of that to remember who God is, where they came from, and to express your trust that God will provide for you in the future. The other side of it is that other part, which is to set a tithe of your income aside for your neighbors, for the widows, for the orphans, for the aliens in your midst, so that they who are vulnerable might have something to eat. And this is about, tying back to our theme that we were working through, is about how our resources are spiritual things. How the decisions that we make about our finances are spiritual decisions. When you receive a blessing, know that it is from God and proclaim that you trust God. Now there are a number of different ways that we can do this in our lives. For me, the big thing that I've learned in the last few years is how to budget. I got a new budgeting software, and it's helped me a lot. Before that, my budgets were, all right, Drew, let's get a spreadsheet, let's write everything down. And I do that, and then the next month, it's so exhausting to try and do it again that I just don't. And so, like, everything's a surprise. And so my giving was sort of based on my own anxiety, my own discomfort, right? If I had just been paid, If we had a good month and nothing sort of disastrous happened, and I was very responsible and ate rice and beans more than I ate Chipotle, then I could give something. I could share something. And if somebody said, oh, Drew, here's this need, and I thought, oh man, I really want to support this need, I could do it. But if I went out to eat a little bit more, if the car broke down or something happened, or if some other, there's just baffling expenses that you don't ever see coming. Car registrations. It's a surprise every year. If something like that came up, then, oh gosh, I can't. And so when I finally got my sort of budgeting life set together, the thing that I did is I put my tithing and my giving on top. So that the first dollars that come in are the dollars that get assigned to the causes of God. And it's a tiny thing, right? I mean, it's just a placement in a spreadsheet. But it has changed, for me, the way that I see myself in my giving. Because instead of giving being like, well, if I've got some extra, I'll give it to you, but if I don't, I can't. Giving has become a priority. God is more of a center in my life, right? Because I've set aside, I've chosen to value that as a fundamental expense for me, not after the rent, but before the rent, the first fruits. And two, instead of giving based on my anxiety and based on the timing of when somebody asks, like if there's two different causes that I really want to support, and one of them calls me on car registration month, nope. And one of them calls me on a good month, yes. But my giving's not based on my trust in God. My giving's not based on what I think is valuable or important in the world. It's based on how confident I feel in my ability to make up for it. And you know what has happened is that I've discovered that the numbers always manage to add up in the end. Even when I don't wait until everything is assured for me to spare $1 for the church, the numbers always add up in the end. And if you don't believe me about this, I was at a Presbyterian women's meeting 2 weeks ago, and Carol Shepson said the same exact thing. So that's 2 weeks. It's not just about our budgeting. Our pledge cards are a way that we do that as a holistic way at the church. Yes, pledge cards are really important for the church year. They enable us to plan what we're going to do for the next year. If we know that we have money to budget for something, that means that we can increase mission giving. That means that we can increase the amount of money that we spend on education. We have hopes and dreams of things that we can do. And pledge income, knowing that assurance, gives us the ability to plan for those things. So pledge income is really important for the church. But I maintain that God does not need your money as much as you need to give that money to God. That is, it is a much more transformative thing for you to choose to give than it is for God, who honestly I believe has some other sources of income if God needs. Instead, it's an act of our own faith and trust. It's a choice to bring our first fruits to God, to make the plan and the hope that we can bring something of what God has given us into the world. And we know, as a church, that things happen. We know that our pledges might go down from year to year. Our jobs change. Sometimes we have something happen that we didn't expect to happen, a job loss, a divorce, a new baby. And our expenses change. And the church is in the business of forgiving debts. We do that every week. Everyone. The church will never be a creditor. It will always be a place where we are thankful for your gifts no matter what they are. And if they have to change, if the number on your pledge is 0 this year, you are still holy and loved and blessed and generous in what you can give if you are lifting up your first fruits to God. And it goes beyond money, too. There are other things that we can do, other ways that we can offer our thanksgiving and our confidence and our trust in God. I had a youth leader one time that gathers together, and she said, all right, let's just write down what we spend our time on. How much time do you spend sleeping? How much time do you spend eating? How much time do you spend going to school and homework? And what about video games? Yeah, we play video games. And television and reading books and hanging out with friends. And then at the very end of that, she said, how much time do you spend on God? And we went, oh. Because that number was much lower than all of these other things that we had done. You know, all of these other pieces of our pie were so much bigger than the amount of time that we spent building a relationship with God, even though all of us would have said that our relationship with God was crucial, was important, was transformative for our lives. Still, we hadn't really figured out how to do it. But I'm learning. I have a friend, and he says he does not ever get out of bed before he's done his devotion. And he is one of the most incredible Christians I have ever met. If you ever say to me, like, who is it that you want to be as a Christian, it's him, because he is a profoundly faithful person. He has lived his life in devotion to Christ. And I don't know that there's like a one-to-one correlation there, but it sure seems that by taking a little bit of time out of his day to offer the first fruits of his day to God, that he has a different way of looking at the world than maybe I do, or maybe the rest of us do. Well, we should learn from this ancient practice. Dragging yourselves all the way down to the tabernacle or the temple or the high place or the holy place to offer up your first fruits to God is not about money necessarily. It's about carving out space in your life to appreciate and to trust. We do this with our money. We do this when we set aside money for God, trusting that God will provide for us more, trusting that God will make sure that we're going to be okay for the next year. But we also do it with our time. When we say, I know that I am busy, but I choose to volunteer, to spend an hour on Wednesday afternoon in the food pantry, to go down and read with a child, to give some period of our time to visit somebody in the hospital or somebody in a nursing home. I've never felt like any of that time was wasted. And every time I do it, I feel so much more thankful. Even when I'm worried about getting all of the things done that I need to get done that day, if I carve out that time in my life, it is something that is always, I feel like I've gained sacred time at little cost. There are tons of things that we can do. Pledge cards are a beautiful thing, but what if next year we all brought a little bit of the first fruits of our garden, and we sat it down in front of the table, and we said, these are the gifts that you have given us, this miracle of fruit, of tomatoes and zucchini and squash and carrots coming up out of the ground is your miracle. It's not our miracle. And we said, let's eat them together. Or let's take them and vow to share them with a neighbor so that we're breaking tomato with somebody else in our life. Or donate it all to the food pantry to practically, to take our first fruits and give them away. We could host a meal where anybody is invited. The thing about this concept of the first fruits is it's about setting aside something in your life for God. Some space, some time, some resources to remember that God has delivered for us, that God has delivered us, and to trust that God's deliverance is not some tenuous thing, but an assured thing, something that happens over and over and over. It is something that is ongoing forever because it was won for us so long ago in the greatest gift of all, in Jesus Christ. bonus. I know we spend this week thinking about thankfulness. And I hope that you will find some time this week to think about how you might build thankfulness into the rest of your life. Giving some time to God, giving some time to your neighbor, taking your first fruits and lifting them up in trust, knowing that what God has provided, what God has promised, will be fulfilled. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.